when we look at the brain and we understand how it works, it helps to know a little bit about the physiology. So in what feels like a former life, when I used to train fitness instructors and personal trainers, when I taught anatomy and physiology, obviously I had to teach how muscles work. And how muscles work is that they have very fine, tiny filaments, and when the muscle shortens or contracts, they do this. So it's a very mechanical, physical process. So when I do a bicep, that's happening in millions and millions of tiny little filaments at the same time. And I can see it. I can see that shortening and lengthening. But when you have a thought, you know, you don't see your head going in and out like you do on a bicep curl, go, oh, that was a big one. Oh, no, that's not. On that shape are good and that shape are bad. You don't get any of that. The only way you know if it was a helpful thought or not is by the consequence, by the outcome of that thought. And that's something that you then have to reflect back on and process. It's not immediate. So if you just ate the biggest, cheesiest, greasiest, covered in sweet tomato sauce pizza, and your trousers went boop, and the button popped off, your brain would very easily make that association, and that would probably restrict the number of pizzas you eat. But because you might enjoy it, and you don't notice the difference until you combine that with a few other dodgy choices, the brain doesn't necessarily allocate that one behaviour to changing how you look and how you feel. Does that make sense? So we'd have to spend the whole time going back retrospectively looking at, well, I had that thought and since then this and this and this has happened. It's much easier and much more effective to literally change how you think. So when we think, we have filaments that go like this, but in the brain it's very different. So there's not that mechanical movement. The brain's energy, instead of being mechanical, is chemical and electrical. So if you imagine, just close your eyes a second and imagine the most amazing night sky. And imagine a gazillion stars, however many that is, more than you can imagine. And you know that in the night sky we have Orion's belt and all these various patterns that supposedly appear. So I want you to imagine a really intricate pattern appearing across the night sky that you see in your mind's eye right now. And it can be like a spider's web or a snowflake with hundreds of different lines and connections. And imagine it makes the most beautiful individual pattern, and then release it and just see the stars. Now imagine another pattern, a completely different pattern across a different part of the sky. And now relax. And now do one more. Imagine a completely different part of the sky, stars lighting up in different ways. And relax. And open your eyes. And that's what it's like when you have thoughts. So you've got the potential for millions and millions of different connections, of the end of all the axons and dendrites in the nerve cells, and they don't touch. There's a tiny little gap, which we'll talk about further down the line, and that tiny little gap is called the synaptic gap, and the signal literally hops across that, just like when you've got a ferry taking a car from land in England, say, to land in France. You've got that space where the thought has to be transported. And effectively the ferries, if you like, are called neurotransmitters. And there's different neurotransmitters that make you feel different. So we'll talk about those more as we go on. But we know some neurotransmitters make us feel nice and happy and relaxed, and other neurotransmitters promote stress and anxiety. And that can be changed by how you move your body, by your thoughts, and also by your diet. So we'll cover all of those options. But for now, let's just understand that we have these patterns. Now, the patterns are the same in terms of repeatability every time you do that thing, whatever that thing is. So, for example, we have a pattern for walking. We have a pattern for moving. We have patterns for thinking and feeling certain ways. So these neurological maps are set during childhood, from the age of birth literally till we're about 11. Our brains are super plastic. But after that, we can still change them, and we're going to look more at that process, and it's called neuroplasticity. And where it gets really interesting is when we get to self-directed neuroplasticity, which means you can go in and change the things you don't like. You can go in, find maps that aren't working for you anymore, and literally change them. And that's what the program is all about, is being able to do like an inventory, if you like, of all of the thought maps and everything you've got, specifically related to how you feel about yourself and your relationship with food. Because your relationship with your body, and that includes what you put in it, that's the longest relationship you're ever going to have. And like all relationships, it can be nurturing or it can be abusive. And for so many people, the way that they treat themselves is nowhere near as good as the relationship they have with their friends or their family. And people will say and do things to themselves that they would never do or say to anybody else. And that has to stop.